Hello, welcome to this lesson on business cycles. We can see here that when real GDP, which is production in the economy, goes up, the unemployment rate is going down. When real GDP or production is going down, the unemployment rate is going up. Here we have a diagram of the business cycle. So we have real GDP, which is production on the y axis, just time on the x axis. We can see the business cycle right here, but first I want to mention this straight line. The straight line is potential output. This is real GDP at full employment, or what the economy can sustain for a long period of time. This is the economy's natural state, if you remember the natural rate of unemployment from our previous videos. Now, the economy is not always going to be at its full employment potential output. Sometimes it's going to go up. That's called an expansion when real GDP is increasing. Then, when real GDP reaches its maximum point in the current cycle, we call that a peak. Afterwards, the GDP is going to contract. It's called a contraction. It's going down. And then it reaches its lowest point in the current cycle, the trough, and then repeats all over again with another expansion. So the business cycle always goes expansion, peak, contraction, trough, then back to expansion and continuing that cycle right there. If the current cycle is above the potential output, we call that a positive output gap, also called an inflationary gap. And if the current cycle is below the potential output, then we call that a negative output gap or a recessionary gap. Now, the current GDP, you can see here, that's where the business cycle is. And it could be at potential output. That means we don't have any output gap, but it's usually in one of these gaps right here. How do we know how much of an output gap we have? Well, we get the current GDP, wherever we are on that cycle, minus the potential GDP at that specific time frame. So let's say this would be the current GDP, and that would be the potential GDP. And that would tell us how much of an output gap we have. If it's a positive number, positive gap. If it's a negative number, negative gap. So here we got some numbers right here. Q4 of 2024, the real GDP was 100. Q4 of 2024, the potential output was 150. So then you do the current one, which is 100, minus the potential, which is 150. That gives you an output gap of negative 50, which is negative. So they have a negative gap or recessionary gap. Is another way to say that. If you can see over here, if we go from year A to year B, we can see that GDP is going down. That's called a contraction because GDP is going down from year to year. And since it's a whole year, it lasted more than 6 months. So we actually call it, if it lasts more than 6 months, we call that a recession. And if it lasts a very long time, well, then we call that a depression. That's all for this video. See you next time.